Hi everyone, and welcome to my podcast. This is the first episode, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. I don't know. So why am I doing this channel? Well, perhaps it's because I've got nothing better to do. Perhaps it's just the peer pressure that forces one to add their futile bleating voice to the great cacophony of futile bleating voices on the medium we know and love as YouTube. Or perhaps actually it's something deeper. I'm a sociologist and I really like to look at issues with a degree of critical depth and really like to analyze things and try to understand, why people say the things they do or why they believe the things they do. And I suppose my motivation really is that at some level, I hope that by analyzing these things and talking about them, that maybe somebody somewhere might be a little bit inspired to take on such an attitude. And I think if enough people did this, perhaps we wouldn't have as many fights and arguments and disagreements in society that we do. Perhaps if we all took some time to analyze and understand other people more from a critical perspective, then perhaps we might all get along a bit better. Now, okay, you can call me naive if you like, plenty of people have. You can call me idealistic if you like, plenty of people have. But in the end, it's just that I get tired of turning on the news and seeing how much people hate each other. It gets really wearing, and I don't really think we need to be like that. Anyway, so today's topic is wokeness, and yes, I'm starting with a topic that typically would be seen as critical of the left side of politics, but this doesn't necessarily mean that I'm from the right side of politics either. I probably during the course of these podcasts over the future, I'll take time out to criticize both. But the point of this is not necessarily to lay blame or to say this person and that person is wrong. It's more to just say, well, this is something we could do better. Or we meaning all of us. This is something the left could do better. This is something the right could do better. This is something we could all do better at and maybe not be so much about left and right. Anyway, I'll get on with the story. So wokeness. I was reading an article this week by Alan Jacobs called After Technopoly. Now, technopoly is a simple definition, the universality of life as governed by technology. But simply, technology is so much a part of our lives that basically we live according to its rules. We live within the context of what technology is capable of doing. And this concept follows on somewhat from the idea of hyperreality. My favorite author on this subject is Umberto Eco, or Eco. I'm actually not sure of the pronunciation. And his idea was that the world of technology has become so real to us that in many cases it has replaced the physical real world. And if you look at examples of cyberbullying and, even sometimes people taking really extreme action because of something that they've seen or read on the internet, then you can see that hyperreality is a pretty real thing. And I think that in the context of technopoly, it makes a lot of sense. So what Alan Jacobs' thesis in his article is that technopoly hasn't really solved the problems that it sort of claimed or hoped that it would. If you can imagine Mark Zuckerberg at the creation of Facebook saying, I want to create a way for the world to be brought closer together, to make a global community, and that was all very nice. But actually, what I see from Facebook every day, I've come to the point where I really just don't want to look at it anymore because of so much spite and hatred and attacks and people calling everybody else out for crimes and perceived crimes. And I don't think that that has really brought us together very much. Alan Jacobs argues that some of the reason for this is that in a society that is built on technopoly, we've come to live by rules rather than any deeper concept of values. In a sense, we've lost our capacity for myth-making, which is essential to any strong, dynamic culture. Discussing the example of campus protests in woke culture, Jacobs argues that woke culture in the current context is not reflective of any moral criterion, but rather that it is driven by certain habits of affection and behavior. The affective dimension demands hatred of the oppressor. The behavioral dimension demands call-outs and protests. That's a direct quote, by the way. Now, this was interesting to me because at around the same time, I was on Facebook and I saw this example of, there was a discussion where a climate scientist, somebody had made a meme of this climate scientist calling for a spiritual revolution, saying that it's not enough just to discuss the science because people were not interested. We needed a spiritual revolution, in inverted commas, meaning that we needed to come up with something deeper, some sort of deeper understanding or empathy for the world around us if we were ever going to make such a drastic change as required in order to avoid a climate catastrophe. Now, I mean, you know, whether you like that meme or not is kind of irrelevant, but the participants were talking about the push to delegitimize scientists especially by, particular populist politicians and those who would rather not change their lifestyle particularly. Now, the comments led to a point where some social scientists were saying, well, we understand what the climate scientists are going through. It really hurts to have your life's work delegitimized and be told that you've wasted your time. But this is something that a lot of social scientists have been going through for a very, very long time with the reduction of spending and public funds allocated to social science. Now, a lot of people have come to this point of view of arguing that social science is redundant, that it's irrelevant, that it's just a bunch of political lefties spouting nonsense and blah, blah. We can go on about that. But the reality is that for those of us who work in social science, we've been saying for some time that without the social sciences there to study and critique the way society is, this kind of disaster where people can easily just ignore scientists, climate scientists, physical scientists, can happen because we're not actually analyzing, what we're doing or how society is changing. Anyway, so that's maybe a tangent for another time. But one of the commenters in arguing their case used the quote of Niemöller as a metaphor, this idea of, yes, we as social scientists know what you're feeling, but we've been there for a long time, and sometimes we feel that, for the climate scientists, it's kind of a case of, when they came for the social scientists, I said nothing. And that was the extent of the metaphor. Now, I don't think that, anybody with any reasonable mind would see that as anything but a metaphor. And given that we are actually talking about a climate catastrophe and the disasters, natural disasters that are going to follow that, and the potential for massive loss of life, I don't think that metaphor is altogether inappropriate. Anyway, woke attack. And you can hopefully see this on the screen now. And somebody attacked that author and say, wow, you're comparing yourself to the rounding up of the Jews. And I remember looking at that thinking, oh my God, where can you go with that? This example is consistent with the feature article about Ayeshat Akanbi by Kathomi Gachwiri in talking about wokeness. Kateri argues that although wokeness may come from good intentions, that in effect it really has become, and I'm quoting here, a performative, trendy buzzword that really the way that it is used is more as a test of others' commitment to progressive ideals. She calls it performing activism, an act of policing, moralizing and silencing others, that there is this element of moral superiority rather than an effort to seriously address the inequalities present in society. So here's the thing. Being woke is essentially a good thing. I mean, if we want to consider it from a sociological background, it's somewhat similar to C. Wright Mill's concept of sociological imagination, of being able to look and see the kinds of structures and power relations that exist between people. Now, the term wokeness actually has a black origin, and so somewhat ironically, the way that wokeness has come to be used is a kind of cultural appropriation, which perhaps this is my subtle way of doing a woke call out on people who use woke call outs inappropriately. So the idea of being woke in itself is not necessarily bad. And I'm not even necessarily saying that we shouldn't at times correct people. That if somebody's being demonstrably racist or sexist or homophobic or transphobic, that there should be a place for us to say, hey, dude, that's not cool. You really shouldn't say that sort of thing. But there is also a responsibility to use that in such a way that it doesn't lead to negative effects. The problem with being woke inappropriately or using these wokeness call-outs inappropriately is that it has the tendency to polarize people even further. It increases resistance to change. If you look at any Facebook conversation, you'll see that the arguments don't get better when somebody starts using these inappropriate woke call-outs. It contributes to backlash against marginalized communities. So an example of this I'm going to use is the trans community. Now, this is a very small population and a very marginalized group that experiences a great deal of discrimination and just, I don't know what you call it, just mindless hate from all kinds of non-trans people, even people who are within the LGBT community, particularly I saw an example of gay men who started a petition to drop the T from LGBT. So you see that trans community experiences really even discrimination within discriminated groups. So this is a very small proportion of the population. But the community has, in general, made slow but steady progress. In a lot of places now, it has become legal to change your legal sex on your birth certificate or your passport. So there has been this progress. There's even some countries now include sex change, or whatever you want to call it, sex reassignment surgery, gender affirmation surgery, as part of the general health scheme, which is obviously a very good thing. Now, the thing is that I would argue that most trans people want to keep a pretty low profile. It's not something that you really want to advertise to the world, or at least that's my perception of the trans people that I know. Now, the thing is that with this rise in wokeness, we've seen more people calling out anybody who makes a transphobic or a perceivably transphobic comment, sometimes in ways that are not really going to help anybody. And I think sometimes the response from this has been far more negative than had the trans community just been allowed to progress in its own quiet way. So some examples of the backlash are things like bathroom laws or birth certificates that can't be changed. One extreme politician in Queensland, in Australia, wanted to make birth certificates a public record so that you could look up anybody's birth certificate and see their birth sex. Now, I'm not trying to blame wokeness entirely for all of that backlash, but what I am saying is that these are the kinds of things that can happen that they're not going to lead to consequences for the person who makes the call out. They're going to lead to consequences for the group that is being discriminated against. And in that case, being careless with the way that we call things out actually hurts the group that we are purportedly trying to support. So, in conclusion then, I think we all need to be woke. We all need to have a sociological imagination. We all need to be critical thinkers. We all need to look more deeply at the way that we behave and the way that we communicate. And as I said before, I think there is a place to say to people, I really don't like the way that you said that. I don't really feel that's appropriate. And I think that's perfectly acceptable. But I think there's a fine line between woke call-outs and trolling. I think if you're doing it just to make yourself feel or look better, really, you're just a troll. And I think that it's worth thinking about how your words might affect not just the intended recipient, but also the group that you are defending. So that's it for my first episode. I hope somebody listens to this, and I hope that it doesn't just lead to a whole bunch of trolling. I hope that, my intention is that people will think about this and maybe engage with the conversation. So by all means, please comment and let me know. And if you have anything that you think might be worth doing a podcast on, just leave a comment for me and I'll put it on my list of things to do next. Talk to you next time.